Okay, everyone. Welcome to the history lesson. Okay, so today we are going to cover Vietnam War. Okay, specifically, we are going to look at part 3 of Vietnam War. So I'm going to share with you the screen. Okay, for part 3 set of notes, you actually have it. All right, it's inside your Vietnam War pack. All right. Later on, in the next bit of the lesson, you will also be having part 4 notes and an essay for you to do during this lesson. So don't waste your time, because when I come back, I'll just do an entire review of Vietnam War. And again, like I said, Vietnam War is something that can be tested this year, especially because it is part of your new syllabus. All right, so I'm going to share the screen. Please refer to this set of notes. I am looking at part 3, all right, part 3 set of notes, and I'm going to make the screen a bit bigger. Okay, so where are we specifically? We are looking at what we call the escalation of tension between North Vietnam as well as South Vietnam. So if we backtrack and we look at what we were doing, okay, we were actually looking at what was happening or why, for example, the war became more complicated, right? That was the last thing that we did. And then the other thing that we did was we really look at the Geneva Conference, remember? Then we look at the role of the North Vietnamese, right? We look at the role of the South Vietnamese and why specifically South Vietnam in the 1950s were the ones that was not so popular. Okay, so now we are going to continue this part. All right, so we've done number 1, we've done number 2. We're going to do number 3 and number 4 at the same time. All right, so today we're going to learn about this part, which is the escalation of tensions between North and South Vietnam. All right, and the role of key players. So in the Vietnam War specifically, there are a few key players. Okay, then you have specifically the North Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, USA, Soviet Union, USSR is Soviet Union, as well as China. Okay, and then after this, we are going to sort of learn about the end of the Vietnam War. So later on, when it comes to revision, you take a look at, okay, what are the things that you are tested, or how would Vietnam War be tested in an essay? All right, so you'll be doing it at the lesson itself. Okay. All right, so just fast forward to here, part 3, escalation of tension. So let's start. All right. So there is escalation of tension. Now, if you look at the timeline, it is 1954 all the way to 1964. Remember, in 1954, one of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to sort of they wanted to decide, for example, right, to have what we call independence. By 1956, what they wanted was actually, keep bigger. From 1956, what they wanted was to have a unified Vietnam. Okay, but it did not happen. All right, because there was just so much tension and so much clash between these two groups of people, so it didn't materialize. Okay, so who were the players, or who were for example, the people who were involved in this tension? There's, again, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, USA, Soviet Union, as well as China. All right. Now, the local conflict, okay, when I say about local conflict, highlight that for me. Okay, the local conflict here actually means it's between, let me put this, okay, it is between North, okay, as well as South Vietnam. All right, this is the meaning of local conflict. All right, and it continued all the way from 1960. So you see, because they didn't know who was best to unify Vietnam, so they were still in conflict. All right, now local or regional problems can develop into major Cold War confrontation, and we know that. Okay, we've seen that. So what do you call this kind of confrontation specifically? We call them, okay, that means they are they are, no, they're not fighting against big countries, but what we're looking at, what this thing is called is civil war. That means civil war is fighting in between countries, or in between, people in the same country. So what do you call such confrontation? Civil war. Okay, this is what we call civil war. All right, so please write it down and highlight whatever that I am going through. Okay, now let's take a look. Next. So what was the role of the North Vietnamese? So in your notes, there is a QR code, and then you can watch a little bit about the soldiers, all right, that is supporting the North Vietnamese. So this is the flag of North Vietnam. So what was the role of North Vietnam in this tension or this escalation of tension? So one of the things that they did was they supplied the Viet Congs. Okay, who are the Viet Congs? The Viet Congs are specifically soldiers, all right, to execute the guerrilla war. Guerrilla war means like what they do is they sort of they ambushed, okay, against the South Vietnamese government. So if you look at specifically the way that they are dressing like this, and then later on you can watch the video, they don't look so well stocked or well supplied. The soldiers don't do or look like this because they are not. They have very limited weapons. But what they have is the grit and the experience of fighting. Okay, so the North Vietnamese send a lot, in fact, of men, about 40K, to between 1961 all the way to 1963. Change that, all right? 1961 to 1963. So what did the North Vietnamese do? They actually supplied a lot of soldiers. Now, what was the impact? Highlight for me this. What was the impact? That all these soldiers, what they did was they actually attacked the South Vietnamese government, okay? And they were very smart. They choose countryside because that is where you could ambush. That is where you could have this guerrilla warfare. Okay, and they attacked the US Air Force supply bases and everything. So in the war, okay, the role of the North Vietnamese was really supplying a lot more soldiers. Okay, now moving on, how about, the South Vietnamese? And you can see the flag is slightly different. This is the flag of South Vietnam. This is the flag of North Vietnam. So what did they do? Okay, so again, there is another QR code that you can watch after this video. So the role of South Vietnam is, since they are always being attacked by the North Vietnamese, remember Viet Cong is North Vietnamese, okay, they came out with this policy. It is this policy called Strategic Hamlet Program. What is it? Because all these North Vietnamese soldiers were targeting peasants in the South Vietnamese, so what they did specifically, the South Vietnamese government had issues. So what they did is they bring all the soldiers into this kind of villages, all right, and it became this well-guarded villages. So this strategic hamlet program is to remove peasants or farmers to places where they can be well-guarded here. Now, when they remove civilians, it allows the US Air Force and the South Vietnamese Army to just destroy them, the North Vietnamese soldiers, without civilians caught in crossfire. I think that was the one that was really, really important. Okay, so that means they try to remove all the civilians out, and then they actually put fortified. The meaning of fortified is all this well-guarded thing. Now, unfortunately, even though the role of the South Vietnamese was actually to stop the North Vietnamese soldiers to sort of conquer them, it didn't work. All right, it didn't work specifically. Or why was this a failure? It was a failure because the South Vietnamese were not popular. Right, the South Vietnamese government, the South Vietnamese even soldiers, they were actually not popular. So the peasants or the farmers in South Vietnam, or the normal people, in fact, they were not supporting. Okay, and in fact, when they were stuck in all these fortified villages, they actually sort of became undercovers for the North Vietnamese soldiers. Okay. All right, so this is another thing. Please add on to your set of notes. Now, China. Why was China involved? And this is the flag of China. And then you can see right here, this is Ho Chi Minh, and this is, of course, President Mao. Okay, why was China involved? Now, I want you guys to look at the proximity of China as well as Vietnam, very, very near. So imagine at the 17th parallel here, right? Okay, if let's say the South Vietnamese were to conquer and be very successful in going and taking over North Vietnam, all right? Imagine, and you must remember that who is supporting the South Vietnamese is actually USA, correct? And USA and China, there is always this tense relationship because China is communist. So imagine if, let's say, that were to happen, right? uh, China was very worried. China was very worried that, North Vietnam will fall into the hands of South Vietnam, and that means that USA's influence is very near their border. So, what was the role of China? Okay, so China played a very significant role, in fact, all right, and one of the things, specific things that they did was it is to show support for fellow communist country. So there was a certain loyalty to Ho Chi Minh. Okay, there was a certain loyalty to Ho Chi Minh, and it was very, very clear that these were the things that the Chinese government actually did. Okay, now China wanted to build what we call an anti-US buffer, which is this in Vietnam. All right, and one of the things, as I mentioned just now, why? Because China didn't want to be vulnerable. Okay, and another reason why China was very involved in the Vietnamese War was because China also wanted to rally the people together. Okay, you create war because you want people to support you. I think that is one of the key fundamental things. All right, now moving on, you also have the role of Soviet Union. Okay, why Soviet Union was involved? I mean, Soviet Union seems to be so far away. But the whole idea was because there was a communist country, an important communist country, Vietnam, okay, that was fighting a lot of other countries. So that is why Soviet Union was supporting Vietnam. And one of it is they supported specifically the Viet Cong, the soldiers, the Vietnamese soldiers, okay, and because both China as well as Soviet Union, even though they were communists, they were not really friendly with each other. So that is why Soviet Union sort of overcompensate and sort of gave more support to North Vietnam. Okay, and in fact, one of the many reasons why Soviet wanted to help North Vietnam was to show that Soviet Union leadership was good. Okay, and but what did Soviet gift? All right, they provided with more arms, essential supplies, and even things such as aircraft and surface air missiles, such as this. All right, so there was a lot of investment by Soviet Union towards North Vietnam. Now, the other person that was really involved was, of course, the USA, correct? And you can see in the beginning of the war, okay, there's also another QR code for you to go and watch. In the beginning of the war, one of the things that USA did was to actually just increase the number of military advisors and economic assistance. That means money. I give money when it comes to fighting the North Vietnamese, okay? And USA was very, very willing to support any countries who were not communist. Why? Because there is this constant fear that if one country becomes communist, another country will be communist as well. So this fear that more countries will turn communist. And this is what we call the domino theory. All right, there's this thing called the domino theory where one country becomes communist, another country becomes communist. So this was a real fear that the countries or USA had. Okay. All right, now let's take a look at who were the US presidents at the time. Okay, so you have Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. Okay, so you can take a look. This is how long he was in power. Okay, and what was America's role? So America's role was very minimal. America just wanted to send military aid or military advisors. That's it. But I will not fight the war for you. So from 1953 to 1961, America sent 700 military personnel. So military personnel were just helping, not war per se. Okay, so when Eisenhower was stepped down from being president, there was another guy called Kennedy. All right. And again, Kennedy sent 500 special troops. Okay, a little bit more serious now because you have special troops as well as military advisors to assist the Western government. And at the end of it, he had about this many military advisors. So again, while we look at the definition of military advisors, they were just giving help to the local South Vietnamese soldiers to fight. All right, and then you have Johnson, however, after Kennedy passed away, okay, Johnson took over, but he changed. He launched a full-scale military intervention. So instead of just advisors, what he did was he increased the number of people and he really put in soldiers to fight alongside the South Vietnamese, with the South Vietnamese to go against the North Vietnamese. So you can see in just a matter of 10 years, and you can see that the war actually will end another 10 more years, 10 years, the way or the sentiment or the way the president is changes everything. So you see, don't want to commit, President number 34, Eisenhower, don't want to commit. President number 35, Kennedy, don't want to commit. But he decided he must do something. Why? Is it because he wanted recognition? He wanted fame? Well, there were reasons. And one of the reasons why America was more aggressive to the North Vietnamese was because, remember the leader of North Vietnam? Okay, he was assassinated by his own people. And there was a lack of, not string, yeah, please change that, a lack of strong leaders as a replacement. So now Vietnam, South Vietnam specifically, don't have a good or strong leader. So America is very, very, very worried. And it doesn't help that, you remember I was telling you just now that China was interested in North Vietnam, to help North Vietnam. Well, it doesn't help that China, during this period of time, also exploded its first atomic bomb. So it actually shows that USA's position in Southeast Asia is really, really dangerous. So no choice, Johnson had to increase the number of advisors, increase economic aid, and make a very, very tough decision of actually going to war. Okay, that was it. Now, where was the trigger of going to war? So sometimes the Vietnam War is also known as the Second Indochina War. I just wanted you to take note. Okay, so from 1964 to 1976, something happened. All right. Now, this was the trigger that sort of pushed USA into the war. You can find two QR code on the left and right, and then there's a YouTube link. Please watch this. It's a very important part. And this will tell you specifically this Gulf of Tonkin here, the one that I'm circling, is why. Why does this make or trigger USA into the war? Okay, so this is what happened. Okay, so the North Vietnamese, all right, patrol boats and attack this particular US ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Gulf is just a space. It's just like a body of land. So it looks sheltered like this. This is the meaning of Gulf. Now, the Gulf of this, something happened here. And because something happened, all right, the United States Congress or the Parliament decided to make a more decisive action. That means do something more. And because of this, Johnson, who's Johnson? This guy here, Johnson, okay, had all the powers to prevent further aggression and tried to achieve peace and security. So what was the significance of it? Okay, so what happened was that now, because America was being attacked by apparently the North Vietnamese boats, even though technically America is in North Vietnamese border, the water here, okay, they were being attacked. So because they were being attacked, USA retaliate. That means the country retaliate. So you can see because of this incident, it marked the beginning of US military intervention, direct. Okay, and it was not only the US soldiers, it was also soldiers from other countries. Okay, so this was a clear incident, a major incident that led to the escalation of war, this particular incident, which is called Gulf of Tonkin. All right. Now I want to share with you, I want to stop share this and share with you another in your notes. I'm very sure you would actually have this also, I think. Okay, let me stop share and share with you this one. Okay, this one, all right? You will have it at the back of your part 3 notes. Okay, so this is a possible N level 10-mark question where they ask, why did the conflict in Vietnam escalated into a war? So what you have in the red color are the ones that are no explanation. Okay, so I've put it that if you're going to answer this question, why did the conflict in Vietnam escalated into a war? There are many examples. Example number 1 was the Geneva Conference. Example number 2 was the communist-led insurgency. Insurgency is like fight. Okay, the meaning of insurgency is like fighting. All right. And then number 3 is the Sino-Soviet split. One other reason is the formation of Viet Cong. Okay. The South Vietnamese counter-insurgency, means they counter-fight because the North Vietnamese was the one that were fighting. So the South Vietnamese sort of responded. Assassination of Diem, which is the president of South Vietnam, he passed away. And because he passed away, there was no good leader that America could depend on. So America decided to take things in his own hands. And what I just told you was the Gulf of Tonkin. Okay, so what specifically happened is, okay, so I want you guys to read. Okay, you need time to read. And I am showing you this. So for example, in the Geneva Conference where there was a partition of Vietnam, how did that lead to a war? It led to a war because both sides, right, which is South Vietnam as well as North Vietnam, they had their own aim and they would not stop at anything, even if it means to go to war. Okay, so this is your factor, this is your description and example, and this is what we call the link. Okay, so I want you to copy the red color one here. So you can pause the video and copy this into your deck of notes. Okay, next, the other thing that is missing is how is it that the formation of Viet Cong? So who are Viet Congs? Viet Congs are North Vietnamese soldiers. Okay, and why is it that it has led to war? What is the link? All right, now because there was a group of Vietnamese fighter or elite fighters, okay, and they contribute material support, military support, okay, it sustained the communist-led insurgency in South Korea. That means it continued fighting and it led to war. Okay, so this is the link. Again, like I said, go and pause this and then copy this in your deck of notes. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so when the North Vietnamese seems to be putting in a lot of materials, a lot of resource to fight the South Vietnamese, then why is it then escalating into the war? Because the South Vietnamese counter fight. Okay, now this war, where's the link? This war was a low-level conflict, but it can build up over time because both sides refuse to budge. So when both sides refuse to budge or give in, it may lead into something that is more complicated, and that's why it becomes a war. Okay, so again, pause here, copy this in your deck of notes. All right, so I'm going to go and sort of just check in. So we have finished part 3 of the Vietnam history. We are going to part 4. So the part 4 notes, you should have it. The relief teacher should have been giving this to you. A part 4 set of notes as well as an essay, which I'm going to go through now. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen again. All right. And we're here. We're the last bit now. Okay, part 4, the end of Vietnam War and the immediate after effect. Now, your set of notes, somehow the stapler is a bit weird. So you have to learn how to toggle a bit. Okay, what you see is you just have to switch some of the pages. Okay, so you have the end of the Vietnam War and the immediate after effect. So we've done number 1, number 2, as well as number 3. We are at number 4. So what happened? Okay, now, when we do this, one of the other things that you need to know is in between the fighting. So from here, 1976, they continued fighting. All right. Now, Americans were more, I would say they were more serious about winning the Vietnamese War. Okay. But unfortunately, all right, they lost the war. Okay, how did they lose the war? So the part where they were losing the war, right? There is another deck of notes that later on I will refer you to it. Okay, so the impact is very simple. Once the Vietnamese were so invested into the war, it looks as though they are going to withdraw. Because why? Okay, things happen. Okay, the Americans couldn't sustain the war efforts in Vietnam. All right. So when I come back to class, I'll talk about it a little bit more. And this happened. Of course, no more Johnson. You can see that this is a new president. His name is Nixon, Richard Nixon. Highlight that for me. Okay. And one of his promises was that he was going to leave and end the war and restore peace. So you can see this particular news header. Ceasefire means stop fire. All GIs are what the locals call the American soldiers out of Vietnam in 60 days. Okay, and literally even though Nixon, the president, wanted to continue the war, but you realize that the war is something that was ongoing, and it was so bad in terms of the morale of the people back in America as well as the morale of the soldiers. Okay, now the United States withdraw. Unfortunately, Ho Chi Minh, who was the defender of Vietnam, died in 1969. He didn't even see that the US forces left and his country reunified. Okay, so this was the things that he said. All right. Okay, what kind of revolution so he passed away, unfortunately. Now, what is another impact of the Vietnam War? Fall of Saigon. Remember Saigon? Saigon is the capital of South Vietnam. Okay, now because there was no more US support, all right, North Vietnamese literally launched a major offense against the South Vietnamese. That means they went ahead to conquer. Okay, in April 1975, the South Vietnamese president resigned, okay, and fled away, ran away. Okay, and in one of the bleakest failure in Vietnam, there was a lot of news articles to show that a lot of these people were trying to run away because some of them don't want to be part of don't want to be part of communists. Okay, so they ran away because they feared that the communists would do something. So you can see this particular picture. All these were actually the Vietnamese who were trying to run away using very small helicopter, and this was called the Operation Frequent Wind, the final evacuation of US civilians as well as Vietnamese civilians. Failed, however. Okay, now the communists were obviously victorious because now there is no one that is stopping them. America has left, South Vietnamese democratic leaders also left, and they declared that there was a victory in Saigon, and Saigon was later on named as Ho Chi Minh City, named after the revolutionary leader that passed away. And after 30 years of constant struggle, Vietnam is reunified, but Vietnam is a communist state. Okay, and at the same time, watch this video, all right, the QR code, the communist government in Vietnam also sought to establish an iron fisted rule. So they were not so innocent as well. We've established that both sides were equally very hardliner. Okay, all right, and they set up a lot of camps for the South Vietnamese to be re-educated. Okay, so what is the aftermath? So this is one of the N-level questions. What is the aftermath? Okay, because the Americans sort of fled away from the Vietnam War, okay, it really made them think whether the USA's actions in Vietnam, killing a lot of innocent civilians, were they actually good? All right, so there's a lot of questioning towards the Americans because previously America was seen as a hero, but now a lot of people are questioning their actions. Okay, America also failed containment. Remember the meaning of containment? Containment was to stop the spread of communism. Okay, write it down. All right, to stop the spread of communism. So literally failed, literally failed. Okay, and this also showed that the US presidency, in fact, wasn't good. So because of that, okay, Congress, which was the parliament, decided that there must be actions to stop the US president. So they had this limiting power. It's called the War Power Act, limiting the ability of president to go to war. And it was now the start of deton. Okay, deton actually means reduced of tension. So after 20 years in Vietnam War, I think the Americans were very cautious about starting another war. Okay, and in fact, USA was the one that tried to initiate improvements with the communist world. And they were also visiting communist countries. So you can see there was a huge change in terms of their attitude towards communists. All right, lastly, the conclusion. Now, the Vietnam War was an example of a proxy conflict, highlight that. Okay, there were many other communist countries that helped the North Vietnamese. All right, now the war demonstrates that ideology cannot be imposed through unpopular government. That means even though South Vietnam was relatively better in that sense, democratic, but they didn't win the hearts and minds of the people. All right, so that's why they were very unpopular. Now, it was a very long, destructive 20 years. 20 years. And the US were very cautious about giving help to another country. They didn't want to have another Vietnam. Okay, but Soviet Union didn't really care, and Soviet Union went to help in another country, which is Afghanistan, and many commented that it was USSR or Soviet Union's version of Vietnam. Okay, so I'm going to save here. I want you in this deck of part 4 notes, if you look very carefully, you would actually have this deck of notes. Let me just open it for you. Okay, let me share. Give me a minute. Okay, this one. Okay, so this is a more detailed, I would say, description of the outbreak of Vietnam War. And then you can see that in every, even though, okay, so this one is from SAB, okay, not required to know everything about the Vietnam War, but they need to be aware of the major turning points. So in your slides, I think there was some error in between. So you must have page 1, 2, page 3 as well as page 4. There should be 4 pages of this. Okay, and in these pages, you can actually see this is all the different or the key military campaign of the Vietnam War. Do you need to know all of it? No, not necessarily, but you need to know some. So what I have done is I have also put in small little QR codes for you to watch the video. So you can use this time to watch this video and to try to understand this entire thing. This was what I was doing and planning for you. Okay, so this is one thing that you can do. Okay. Now the other thing that you should have is actually this particular essay. All right, you should have this essay. It says here, explain the role of America and Soviet Union in escalation of tension. So I want you to highlight for me America, obviously democratic, okay, Soviet Union, obviously communist, okay. What is the meaning of escalation? The one in green. All right, so the meaning of escalation, it is increased tension. All right, so the role, what did America do? What did Soviet Union do? And what did they contribute? So when you do this, how do you write specifically? Correct, correct. Okay, so you need to refer to, okay, give me a minute. You need to refer to your slides. Okay, to your slides, and in your slides, it is this part. See, the role, the different roles, and how they escalated to the conflict. The different roles between America, the different roles between Soviet Union, and how it escalated the conflict between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Okay, look at the year, it is between this year. So explain the role. So if you look at page 2, all right, America played an important role, blah, blah, blah. What did America do? An example would be, now, hence America actions led to tension. Why? Okay, so you can see I scaffold this for you already. Oops. Can you see? This one. Okay, I think I didn't show this. This one. Okay, I highlight this, and the meaning of escalation is increased tension. So where do you get the the paragraphing? Where do you get the answers? Okay, so you look, when you write an essay, there must always be point, examples, elaboration, as well as link. So if you look at the point, I've put it there already because we're talking about America. So America played a role. What did America do? Okay, an example would be, and then the Americas. So this is literally in your own words, in your own understanding. So the next one is Soviet Union played an important role. An example would be, hence Soviet Union's actions led to the tension because. So where do you get this information? You get this information when you read this deck of slides, this one. So can you see the role of America, the role of Soviet Union here, the role of America is here. Okay, so now but the question is really about how is it that when America come in into the picture, it became worse. Okay, and how is it that after the Soviet Unions come in, it became worse? So how did it escalate to tension? So you need to answer the question itself. All right, the rules, you already know where to get the information. Now, next is you need to give me 1 or 2 example. And I want to see how you link. Okay, so use your common sense in that part to actually link it up. All right, so you are going to have this. Okay, you already have this. You already have part 4. You also have your part 3 notes with you. Okay, so try to do as much as possible, especially those of you who are a bit more faster, and finish up the essay. Okay, I just want to see how you write. We need to practice writing already. Okay, so that's all for today's lesson. I hope you guys understand, and I'll come back to wrap or to sort of summarize the Vietnam War. Okay, all right, so I will see you. Bye bye.